The first thing you notice is the quiet. Not the peaceful kind you get on vacation, but that deep, settled quiet that sinks into the walls of a house. A quiet that remembers voices and footsteps that aren't there anymore. In a small town in Colorado, where the pine trees press close and the mountain sits steady on the horizon, a woman named Eleanor Hayes is learning to live with that kind of quiet. Most evenings look the same. She boils water for 1 mug of tea, lemon and honey, out of habit. She straightens a throw blanket that never really gets messy. She checks the front door twice, not because anyone's coming, but because routines are what hold up the day when you're not sure what else will. The TV murmurs in the background, some rerun she's seen a dozen times. She isn't really watching. Her eyes drift to the empty spot on the couch where a cat used to curl, then to the hallway, where her grown child once stomped off in teenage frustration. That was years ago. The house is tidy now. Tidy and still. There's love in this house, but it doesn't have anywhere to go. Eleanor has known her share of losses. A partner who left this world too soon. The companion cat whose food bowl sits washed and dry in the cabinet. A daughter building a life in another state, as she should. None of it is tragic in the way movies show it. It's just the slow rearranging of a life, one person at a time, until the bed feels too big, and you realize the only footsteps you hear every day are your own. Out beyond her backyard, bobcats still move silently between the trees. Most people in town have never seen one, but they know they're there. Shadowed shapes at the edge of the meadow, pad prints in the fresh snow, a flash of spotted fur caught in a motion-activated camera. Wild, solitary, built for the in-between spaces where forest meets field. Eleanor likes knowing they're out there. It makes the world feel less empty. That evening, just as the sky starts to turn from pale gold to that deep blue that belongs only to the mountains, her phone rings. It startles her. Most calls these days are scheduled. A Thursday check-in, a Sunday, "How are you, Mum?" This one is not. The screen shows a number she recognizes but doesn't see often. The local wildlife rehab center. The one she's volunteered with on and off for years. She answers with that soft, careful, "Hello," people use when they're not sure what's coming. On the other end, a tired voice explains, "There's a bobcat cub, female, confiscated from someone who kept her illegally, treated her like a pet, then gave her up when wild instincts didn't fit inside a living room. She's underweight, confused, showing signs of early imprinting. Because of her past, she can't safely be released into the wild. The sanctuary that will eventually take her is preparing space. But tonight, right now, they have nowhere calm for her to go. They need a foster home. Not a pet home, not a fairy tale, but a stop along the way where she can heal under permits and supervision. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with patience. The rehab staff know Eleanor. They know about the years she spent cleaning cages, mixing diets, sitting cross-legged on concrete floors so frightened animals could get used to the sound of a human breathing without flinching. They also know she has an empty house now. There's a pause. Eleanor looks around, at the neat stack of mail, the single mug, the half-read book face down on the coffee table, the sun slipping off the edge of the porch. She feels two emotions at once, a sharp thread of fear about claws, responsibility, heartbreak, and a softer one underneath, one she hasn't let herself name in a long time. Want. Not just the bobcat's want for safety and kindness, but her own quiet longing to be needed again, to offer loyalty to a living thing and feel it mirrored back, even in a small way, to have a reason to set the alarm for sunrise besides habit. She could say no. It would be reasonable. She's not young. Wild animals take work. The story doesn't promise a happy ending. This isn't one of those moral stories where everything lines up neatly in 30 minutes. But the rehab worker's voice cracks just a little when they mention how full the center is. How this cub has already been through too many hands. How tonight matters. Eleanor hears herself say, "If it's under your permit and we stay in close contact with the sanctuary, she can stay here. For now." The relief on the other end of the line is almost a sound you can touch. They talk logistics, paperwork, safety measures, the reminder, clear and firm, that bobcats are not pets and never will be. This arrangement doesn't change that. It simply means that for a stretch of time, one frightened little wildcat will sleep in a house instead of a concrete run, under the watch of a woman who understands that love and boundaries can exist in the same space. When the call ends, the house feels different. Nothing has changed yet, not really. The furniture is still where it was, the kettle has cooled, but the air has picked up a new current, as if a door somewhere has opened and the night is breathing in. Eleanor stands in the middle of the living room, hands on her hips, and lets out a long, shaky breath. "There's going to be a bobcat here," she murmurs. Saying it out loud makes it real. A real one. She moves into quiet action, not frantic, not dramatic, just steady, purposeful motions that say, "I remember how to do this." She clears a corner of the living room, setting up a large dog crate with blankets and a low box of sand. She checks the latches on the windows. She pulls out an old notebook, the one she used to track weights and feedings years ago, and smooths the first blank page. At the top, she writes one word: Hazel. She doesn't know yet if that name will fit. She only knows that the rehab paperwork mentioned the color of the cub's eyes, and the word came to her like something left on the doorstep. By the time headlights sweep briefly across her wall and a rehab truck pulls into the driveway, the house feels less like a museum and more like a place where something is about to begin. As she walks to the door, Eleanor feels an unexpected mix of emotions. There's nervousness, yes, but also a small, glowing thread of hope. This won't be a fairy tale. It will be messy and wild and full of unknowns. And yet, under all of that sits a simple truth. One little bobcat just wanted love, and tonight, love answered the phone. If listening to this, you feel a memory stir, a dog who laid their head on your knee when you needed it most, a cat who chose your lap on the hardest day, you already know something about the kind of story we're stepping into. A story that's less about taming the wild and more about letting kindness move between two wounded hearts. In the next part, we'll open that carrier door and see Hazel for the first time, through her eyes and Eleanor's, as two strangers try to decide if they can trust each other with what comes next. And as you listen, if a face from your own life comes to mind, you might keep them gently in your thoughts. This isn't just a heartwarming story about a bobcat. It's an inspirational story about what happens when love and loyalty quietly walk back into a quiet house and decide to stay. The crate door clicks open so quietly you almost don't hear it. For a moment, nothing happens. The living room is washed in that soft Colorado twilight, lamplight pooling on the rug, the last blue of the mountains still clinging to the windows. Eleanor has settled herself on the floor a few feet away, legs folded, hands resting loosely in her lap. She isn't reaching in. She isn't coaxing. She's just there. And in the shadowed mouth of the carrier, two eyes are watching her. They're not quite gold, not quite brown, somewhere in between. Hazel, like the name written at the top of the notebook on the coffee table. Those eyes blink once, slowly, as if adjusting to a world that keeps changing before she can catch her breath. This is the first time Hazel has seen this house, but it isn't the first time she stared out from a cage at a human she doesn't understand. From her side, the air smells different. She catches the dry, papery scent of old books, the faint citrus of dish soap, the warm, steady musk that means this is someone's den. There's wood and dust, and at the edges of it all, the sharp green of pine needles blown in when the door opened. Underneath those layered smells, there's something else. Calm. No chemical tang of too many animals in one room. No harsh disinfectant. Just the quiet, lived-in scent of one human life. To a bobcat, scent is a map. Hazel is reading it with every breath. Her ears flick, catching sounds Eleanor stopped noticing a long time ago. The refrigerator compressor ticking on, the clock on the wall marking out seconds, the soft rasp of denim as Eleanor shifts her weight. Slow on purpose. Outside, a car moves down the street, tires humming, gone in a heartbeat. Hazel waits for shouting, for loud footsteps, for the sudden clang of metal she's learned to fear. Nothing comes. Eleanor speaks first, but her voice is barely above the hum of the fridge. "Hi, Hazel," she says. "You're safe here. You can take your time." She doesn't say more than that. No baby talk, no big dramatic declarations of love, just a steady tone that carries kindness without pushing it. For an animal whose whole short life has been full of mixed signals, that steadiness matters more than any gentle words. Hazel shifts her weight forward, claws catching lightly on the carrier floor. The rehab staff told Eleanor she's underweight for her age, that her early life as a pet kept her from learning how to hunt properly. Old bobcat kittens her size would already be trailing after their mothers, pouncing on mice, scaling rocks, memorizing the forest like a living storybook. Hazel has learned different things. The feel of carpet under her paws, the sound of televisions, the ache of wanting to play and being told to be still. A nose touches the edge of the carrier. Air moves differently out here. She pulls back, then leans forward again. One paw settles on the threshold. She freezes. Eleanor doesn't move. This is where impatience could ruin everything, where someone used to fairy tales might reach in, scoop Hazel up, force a moment that looks heartwarming on camera and feels like terror to the animal living it. But this isn't that kind of story. This is the slow, soulful kind, where love and loyalty are built in tiny, almost invisible choices. So Eleanor stays put. She lets Hazel be the one to decide. The bobcat's whiskers fan forward, brushing the air. Whiskers are more than decoration. They're a measuring tool, a way to feel the world without crashing into it. A few long seconds pass, stretched thin. Then Hazel does something small that changes everything. She steps out, not with a bold leap, not with the full weight of her body, but one paw, then another. Each placement tested before she commits. Her body is low, tail held close, muscles ready to spring back into hiding if anything feels wrong. It doesn't. The rug is softer than concrete. It holds the warmth of the room. She can feel through the pads of her feet the faint vibration of Eleanor's breathing. From Eleanor's point of view, it's like watching a wild thought take shape. Hazel is smaller than the pictures in the rehab files made her seem. There are a few patchy places in her fur, a faint line around her neck. But Eleanor deliberately doesn't linger on the damage. She pays attention to the things that are still whole. The bright curiosity in Hazel's eyes, the way her ears swivel, collecting information, the careful intelligence in every movement. This isn't pity. It's respect. Hazel turns her head, scanning the room. There's an armchair, a low table, the glow of the lamp, the dark square of the window with night pressing gently against it. In the reflection, she catches a glimpse of herself, a small bobcat, spots dim in the low light, eyes wide. For a heartbeat, she looks surprised, as if she'd forgotten there was still a wild thing in there somewhere. Eleanor notices that too. "Look at you," she whispers, but more to herself than to Hazel. "You're still in there." She thinks of all the moral stories people like to tell about animals. The fierce bobcat, the fearless hunter, the untamable spirit. Hazel is none of those things right now. She is simply a young creature who has been hurt and confused, who just wants the simple, happy things every living being wants. Safety, kindness, a place to rest when nothing bad happens when you close your eyes. There's a plate on the floor near the carrier, set there earlier, not too close. Raw meat, the kind Hazel is used to from the rehab center. She smells it immediately. Her nose twitches, her body leans almost imperceptibly toward it. Then, just as quickly, she pulls her attention back to Eleanor. For all her hunger, food is not the most important question in the room. Hazel studies the woman on the floor the way a wild animal studies a new piece of landscape. Is she predictable? Is she loud? Does she move fast without warning? Does her scent change when she's frustrated? The humans Hazel has known before have been full of sudden weather, storms of emotion that hit with no warning. This one seems steady. That steadiness is a form of love all its own. Minutes pass like this, with almost nothing happening and everything happening at once. Hazel takes a few more steps, testing the space between them. Eleanor shifts only to ease her knee, telegraphing the motion with a soft word so the bobcat won't startle. There's a moment when Hazel's whiskers almost brush Eleanor's sock. She stops, toes spread, caught between the urge to retreat and the pull of something new. The possibility that this human might be different. Eleanor can feel her own emotions welling up, a mix of protectiveness, sorrow for what Hazel has endured, and a quiet, grow affection that she tries not to rush into words. It's not the time for big declarations. It's the time for presence. In that fragile space, a fresh perspective settles in. It would be easy to tell this as a simple, heartwarming story. Human rescues bobcat. Bobcat returns that love. Everyone goes home happy, but sitting on the floor with her legs going numb and a wary animal inching toward her. Eleanor understands that this isn't about rescuing in the way people usually mean it. Hazel is not an object to be fixed. She is a person in her own right, just born into a different body, with her own history, her own fears, her own language. This isn't about bending her into something tame. It's about building a bridge wide enough for both of them to stand on, without losing themselves. Eleanor exhales slowly. Hazel's ears flick at the sound, but she doesn't run. "Whenever you're ready," Eleanor murmurs. That's the beginning of their agreement, though neither of them knows it yet. Love offered without demand, loyalty earned instead of assumed. A relationship where emotions are honored on both sides, and where kindness is measured, not only in how much you give, but in how gently you wait. In the next part of this inspirational story, time will start to move differently. Days will be measured in tiny milestones. The first playful misstep, the first time Hazel chooses to stay in the room when a storm rolls in, the first hint of trust that looks almost like joy. As you keep listening, you might think back to your own first meetings, with a dog, a cat, or even a person, where everything felt uncertain and fragile, but something in you decided to stay. Those are the moments that change us, even if they don't look like much from the outside. For now, we leave Eleanor on the floor, and Hazel a few careful steps out of the crate, breathing the same warm air, learning the shape of each other's presence. The first glimpse has passed. What comes next is the long, gentle work of turning fear into something softer. The first week wasn't measured in days, it was measured in inches. In how far Hazel dared to step out from behind the couch, in how close Eleanor could walk past a doorway without sending a little bobcat darting back into shadow, in the distance between a trembling paw and a soft worn sock on the floor. Mornings came early in that Colorado house. Light slid in through the east-facing window in a thin stripe that slowly crossed the rug. By the time it reached the arm of the couch, Eleanor had usually finished her tea and written 3 or 4 lines in her notebook. Day 2, one page reads, Hazel watched me stir sugar, ears up, didn't hide. It doesn't sound like much, but for a young bobcat whose life had taught her that humans meant noise, confusion, and disappointment, these small moments were everything. Hazel chose her spots carefully. During the first week, she almost never stayed in the middle of the room. She preferred borders and edges, the narrow gap between the bookcase and the wall, the triangle of shadow behind the chair, the strip of hallway just outside the bedroom. From those little islands of safety she watched. If Eleanor crossed the room too quickly, Hazel vanished. If Eleanor dropped a spoon in the sink, Hazel vanished. If the kettle hissed too sharply, Hazel vanished. But if Eleanor moved at that slow, steady pace she'd practiced at the rehab, soft steps, low voice, no sudden turns, Hazel stayed, just her eyes showing at first, 2 hazel lights in the dim, tracking every motion. Eleanor talked to her in simple sentences, not trying to spin fairy tales, not trying to turn their life into some neat moral story, just gentle, ordinary things said out loud. I'm rinsing the mug now. I'm going to stand up, my knees stiff. I'll be over here on the couch for a while. If you want to watch, that's okay. Hazel didn't answer, not in any way a person from the outside world would recognize. But her body did. On day 3, Eleanor noticed that Hazel no longer bolted from the sound of the kettle. She flinched, yes. Her ears flattened for a second, but she stayed in her spot by the doorway, pressed low, paws tucked under her chest, eyes fixed on Eleanor's face. The first big change came in the middle of something completely ordinary. Eleanor was sorting laundry in the living room, making neat piles on the rug, towels, shirts, socks. It felt good to do something simple with her hands, especially with the weight of Hazel's presence humming quietly at the edge of her awareness. A pair of socks slipped from the pile and rolled toward the couch, stopping near the dark opening where Hazel liked to hide. Eleanor froze. Not dramatically, just enough to let Hazel make the next move. From the shadow, a small, spotted leg extended. Hazel's paw reached out, toes spread, claws just barely showing. Her whiskers were pushed forward, tasting the air. She touched the sock once, lightly, then drew back. For a long moment, that was all. Hazel, a wild little heart, and a single sock between them. Then she did it again. This time, her paw stayed on the fabric. She rested there, as if the cotton was an anchor in unfamiliar water. The sock smelled like Eleanor's skin, like detergent, like the safe, neutral scent of this new house. Holding it seemed to help her decide if this place and this person could be trusted. Eleanor didn't reach for the sock. She didn't turn it into a game or a test. She simply let Hazel have that small victory. Later, she wrote it down. Day 4, paw on my sock. Stayed there a long time. Looking back, it seems like such a tiny thing. No dramatic rescue, no swelling music, no viral, heartwarming story moment. But for Hazel, it was an act of bravery. For Ellen, sometimes it shows up as a quiet willingness to share the smell of your life with someone who's not sure they can accept it yet. Evenings in that first week took on a particular rhythm. Around dusk, Hazel would appear in the hallway, just far enough out of hiding that the glow from the lamp brushed the edges of her fur. She never walked straight into the room. Instead, she'd slip along the baseboards, body low like a moving shadow. Eleanor started thinking of her as the house ghost. She'd be washing dishes and catch Hazel's reflection in the window, just eyes and ears and a faint outline. She'd fold a towel and feel that prickle on the back of her neck that meant she was being watched. Turn too fast, and Hazel froze. Turn slowly, and Hazel held her ground. That's how loyalty began between them. Not with declarations, but with repetition. Hazel kept showing up. Eleanor kept showing up. Night after night, they practiced not running away from each other. From Hazel's side, the emotions were probably tangled. Fear, curiosity, hunger, hope. She didn't know the words for kindness or love, but her body recognized the difference between a human who reached too much and a human who waited. From Eleanor's side, the feelings were clearer. She felt fiercely protective of this small, fierce creature who had every reason to give up on people. She felt a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her last old cat passed. And buried under all of that, there was gratitude. Because Hazel's presence, even as a watching shadow, filled the house with a kind of soulful energy that had been missing for a long time. Some nights, after Hazel disappeared back behind the couch and the house went still again, Eleanor would sit on the rug and think about the strange shape love takes. She thought about her grown child, whose calls now came from different time zones. She thought about her partner's jacket still hanging in the closet, pockets full of old receipts and gum wrappers. She thought about the bobcat out there, this little one that life had tossed around like something disposable. And she realized that what they were building together wasn't just a rescue story. It was an inspirational story about two beings trying to learn, slowly, that it was still safe to care. That loyalty could grow again, even after being broken. That happy didn't have to mean loud or perfect. It could mean a house where nobody yelled and everyone was allowed to take their time. By the end of that first week, the distances in the house had shifted. Hazel's hiding spots stayed the same, but the space between them shrank. She'd linger closer to the doorway while Eleanor read. She'd stretch out just a little farther into the lamplight before retreating. Once, when Eleanor got up to turn off the TV, Hazel chose not to vanish. She simply watched, eyes calm, tail tip flicking slowly. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Eleanor was paying attention. She knew this was the foundation. These quiet days, these careful inches, were what would someday make the bigger moments possible. The playful missteps, the first chirp of greeting, the day Hazel might decide a lap was safer than a shadow. For now, though, it was enough to share a room, to breathe the same warm air, to let the house remember what it felt like to hold more than one heartbeat at a time. As we move into the next part of their story, time will begin to stretch out and soften. Seasons will roll over the mountains. Storms will come and go. Hazel will find new ways to be brave, and Eleanor will discover that healing doesn't only move in one direction. As you listen on, you might glance around your own space, the chair you always sit in, the spot where a pet used to sleep, the corner that feels oddly important for reasons you can't explain. Those little places can carry so many quiet memories of love. In the next chapter, we'll step beyond this first week and watch how those inches turn into feet, then into shared routines. We'll feel the first storm shake the house and see where Hazel chooses to hide when thunder comes. If you'd like, keep a small moment from your own life in the back of your mind. A look, a touch, a paw on your sock that changed more than it seemed to at the time. It might help you walk beside Hazel and Eleanor a little more closely as their bond deepens. The first storm arrived before the first month was over. It marked the first real test of everything Hazel and Eleanor had been building, inch by careful inch. It started with a shift in the air. All afternoon, Hazel had been braver than usual. She'd followed Eleanor from room to room, never closer than a few feet, but present. When Eleanor sorted mail at the kitchen table, Hazel sat in the doorway, paws tucked neatly under her chest. When Eleanor rinsed dishes, Hazel's reflection hovered in the lower corner of the window, a bobcat-shaped question, watching soap swirl down the drain. By now, their days had a rhythm. In the mornings, Hazel explored a little more. Her fur was starting to fill in, patchy spots giving way to a thicker coat that caught the light in soft, tawny waves. Where fear had once held her body tight, there was a bit more looseness, a hint of the athlete she was born to be. She stalked dust motes in the sunbeam, pounced awkwardly on a crumpled paper ball, and occasionally forgot herself enough to do a sideways hop that made Eleanor laugh out loud. Around week 3, the rehab center had helped Eleanor attach a small, secure outdoor run to the back window. Solid fencing, a roof, double latches. It wasn't a forest, but it was air and light and the smell of the real world. The first time Hazel stepped into that space, her whole body lifted. Her nose went up, drinking in 1,000 scents at once. Dry grass, old snow, distant deer, the faint musk of other wild bobcats that passed through the tree line at night. In the wild, a cub her age would be learning the map of her family's territory. Rocks, logs, safe paths, places where rabbits liked to hide. Here, Hazel walked the perimeter of her little run with the same seriousness, pausing often to look back at the window, where Eleanor sat with her notebook, watching quietly. Love in that season looked like patience and plywood and double-checking locks. It looked like giving a wild heart just enough space to remember what it meant to be a bobcat, while still honoring the reality that she could never live fully free again. Then the sky went dark. Wind came from, fingering the pine branches, making them scratch at the roof. Hazel's ears swiveled. She froze in her corner of the run, body turned toward the sound, tail low. The air pressure changed, that heavy feeling before rain, and a distant rumble rolled across the hills. To Hazel, that sound wasn't a weather report. It was a low, unfamiliar growl, bigger than any animal she'd ever known. Every instinct screamed, danger. In a heartbeat, she was at the window, claws on the sill, eyes wide. Eleanor opened it just enough to let Hazel slip through the double barrier and into the living room. then closed and latched it again.
"It's all right," she said softly. "Just a storm."
But Hazel didn't know what "just" meant. Thunder cracked closer now, rattling the glass. A flash of lightning turned the room white for a split second. Hazel darted sideways, claws skidding on the hardwood, breathing shallow and fast. She had a choice: hide far away or hide close. The couch, the bedroom, the dark space under the table, all of those were options she'd used before. But in this moment, she shot straight past them and dove behind the armchair where Eleanor was sitting, wedging herself into the narrow space between chair and wall, her side pressed against Eleanor's heel. Eleanor didn't turn around. She didn't try to pull Hazel out. She simply set her book down, planted her feet gently but firmly, and let Hazel lean into her ankle as the storm passed over the roof. This was one of those heartwarming stories that would never make its way into a thumbnail or a title card. No dramatic music, no fairy tales, no big moral written on the screen. Just a bobcat deciding that if something scared her, the safest place to be was not alone in the back of the house, but close enough to feel a human's warmth through denim. Thunder rolled again and again. Each time Hazel flinched. Each time she stayed. From Eleanor's side, there was a knot of emotions tangled in her chest. Sadness that Hazel had been scared so often in her short life. Gratitude that she was here now, and a deep, almost aching tenderness for this small, wild creature choosing connection over isolation. She could feel Hazel's breathing through the back of her shoe, fast at first. Then, gradually, it slowed. Not all the way to calm, but close enough that Eleanor could sense the shift. Fear giving way to cautious trust. In moments like these, it's easy to see only Hazel's healing. The little bobcat learning to lean, to stay, to let herself be scared and not run away. But there was another healing happening in the room. Quieter, but just as real. Before Hazel, storms had been something Eleanor watched alone from the window. She'd count the seconds between flash and boom, remember camping trips and porch swings, and a time when bad weather meant someone else's hand in hers. Thunder had a way of underlining the emptiness in a house. Now, there was another heartbeat sharing the space. Hazel's fear gave Eleanor a job. To be steady, to be gentle, to be a quiet anchor while the sky threw a tantrum. In offering that calm, she felt some of her own old panic ease. The storm still shook the walls, but it didn't feel like it was shaking her from the inside anymore. As weeks stretched into a full season, the house carried more and more of these small, soulful moments. The first time Hazel played in the outdoor run while snowflakes drifted down, she lifted each paw like the cold surprised her, then pounced and skidded with clumsy joy. The first warm day she rolled onto her back in a patch of sunlight, not as a gesture of full trust yet, but just because it felt good. Eleanor found herself grinning at the simple, happy sight. Through it all, Eleanor added small notes to her notebook. First thunder, hid behind my chair but stayed touching my foot. Snow day. She chased a leaf like it was the most important thing in the world. Sat in the doorway today and yawned while I talked on the phone. Not nervous, just bored. These weren't big milestones to anyone else, but to a woman who'd been walking through her days without much change, and to a bobcat who had never known consistent love or loyalty. They were the building blocks of a new life. A fresh way to see this season of healing is to understand that time wasn't just passing, it was layering. Each small act of kindness, each quiet evening, each shared storm left a trace. They were writing a story together. Not a polished moral story with a tidy ending, but an inspirational story about two beings learning to trust that tomorrow could actually be gentler than yesterday. As we move into the next part of Hazel and Eleanor's journey, we'll see that healing isn't a straight line. There will be setbacks, sharp noises, scratched skin, and hard questions about what's truly best for a wild animal like Hazel. Before we step into those harder moments, you might take a breath and think about your own seasons of healing. The first time you realized a day had passed without the old ache being quite so sharp. The first storm that didn't undo you. The small rituals that helped you through. Those memories can sit beside Hazel's now, as we follow her into the next chapter, where love will have to prove itself not just in calm weather, but when things suddenly go wrong. The first real mistake didn't look like much. It sounded like a ladder slipping. Late one afternoon, the light was soft and slanting through the pines, and the day felt ordinary in the best way. Hazel had spent the morning in her outdoor run, nose to the breeze, tail flicking as chickadees hopped along the fence line. Inside, Eleanor moved through her quiet rituals. Laundry, dishes, a phone call to her daughter. She was just about to make tea when the neighbor decided to move a metal ladder along the side of his house. It scraped the siding, wobbled, and slammed hard against the ground. The crash was sharp enough to make the windows buzz. Hazel exploded. One moment she was in the run, half dozing on the platform. The next, she was a blur of spots and panic, flinging herself at the window, claws clattering against the glass. Eleanor snapped to attention, heart pounding. "It's okay, she called, already moving toward the latch. In her rush to get Hazel inside, she forgot one of the rules she'd been so careful about. Slow movements, predictable motions. She swung the inside window open too quickly. Hazel shot through the gap like a trapped thought finally finding an exit. She hit the living room floor at speed, claws seeking traction on the hardwood. There was a split second, just enough time for Eleanor to see the wild, unfocused fear in those Hazel eyes, before Hazel skidded straight toward the coffee table where Eleanor kept her notebook. At the last moment, Eleanor stepped in to block her from crashing into the sharp edge. Hazel didn't mean to hit her. Her paw just didn't know where to land. 4 quick scratches, hot and bright, bloomed across Eleanor's forearm. The pain came a beat later, a sting that spread under the skin. Hazel froze. Her body was still in flight mode, every muscle keyed to run. But something in her recognized what had just happened. Her eyes locked on the red lines, then on Eleanor's face. In that heartbeat of silence, she seemed to wait for the world she knew to return. The shouting, the punishment, the anger. Eleanor felt a rush of shock. Then an older reflex rising, the urge to scold, to pull back, to say no in a sharp voice. Years of living with well-behaved house cats had taught certain habits. But this wasn't a house cat having a tantrum. This was a young bobcat whose whole nervous system had been taught that life could turn violent without warning. So Eleanor did something different. She took one slow breath, then another. She kept her voice level. "It's all right," she said quietly, more to Hazel than to herself. "We scared each other." She backed up a step, not crowding Hazel, and walked to the kitchen sink. Hazel stayed rooted to the spot, watching every move. Eleanor ran cool water over the scratches, wincing as the skin protested. Blood swirled pink down the drain. She found the first aid kit, dabbed ointment, pressed gauze. Her hands shook a little, not from anger, but from the realization that this work, this love, wasn't going to be as simple as the heartwarming stories people sharing short clips online. This was real. This was wild. This was love with claws involved. By the time she turned back, Hazel was gone. Not into the outdoor run, not into the hallway shadows. She had wedged herself under the lowest shelf of the bookcase, pressed so flat against the wall that for a moment, Eleanor thought she'd vanished into it. For the rest of the evening, Hazel didn't move. Eleanor sat on the couch with a book she didn't really read, gauze taped along her arm, emotions running high and tangled. Guilt pricked at her. Had she moved too fast? Should she have seen the fear building sooner? Underneath that, a quieter question pulsed. Am I doing the right thing for her? For me? For any bobcat? It's one thing to talk about kindness and loyalty in the abstract, to tell inspirational stories where love cures all and no one gets hurt. It's another to sit in a room lit by a single lamp, feeling the sting of fresh scratches, and knowing the animal who gave them is hiding because she fully expects punishment. That night, Eleanor lay awake longer than usual. The rehab center had always been clear. Hazel wasn't a pet. She was a non-releasable wildcat who, because of human choices, would live her life in some form of captivity. The plan had always been for her to move on to a sanctuary once space was ready. Eleanor's house was supposed to be a step, not a destination. Maybe she'd be better off there sooner, Eleanor thought, staring at the ceiling. With other bobcats, with people who do this full-time. The next morning, as if summoned by that thought, the rehab coordinator called. "We've had a sanctuary in New Mexico open up a spot," they said. "Large habitat, natural features. They're ready for Hazel when you are." On paper, it sounded perfect. More room, more professional care, more of the world Hazel was born to belong to. Eleanor listened, nodding, tracing the edge of the bandage on her arm. They agreed she'd drive down in a few days to see the place, meet the staff, talk about what would be best. The drive there felt heavier than it should have. Pines gave way to scrub and rock as she headed south. The radio stayed off. Her mind kept looping back to Hazel under the bookshelf, to the feel of that small, unintentional injury, to the way fear had filled the room like smoke. The sanctuary, when she arrived, was everything she'd hoped. Thoughtful enclosures, shade, climbing structures, staff who spoke about the animals with respect and clear boundaries. She saw adult bobcats melting into tall grass, eyes half-lidded in contentment, and her chest ached. This is right, she told herself. This is the kind of place she deserves. And yet, watching a keeper toss meat into an enclosure, she noticed something small. A bobcat with scars along his nose who never approached the fence when humans came. He stayed at the back, body angled away, as if the very sight of people still hurt. Some of them never really come around to us, the keeper admitted. They live a good life, though. Space, safety, their own kind. On the long drive back, the road unspooled under her tires, and another thought began to form. Not neat, not easy, but insistent. Hazel had already come around. Not all the way, not perfectly, but she had pressed into Eleanor's heel during that storm. She had chased leaves in the run while checking the window to make sure Eleanor was there. She had laid a paw on a sock and stayed when she could have run. What if uprooting her again, just as she was learning that one human could be safe, cost her more than it gave? Back home, the house smelled faintly of pine shavings and the last meal Hazel hadn't quite finished. The run sat empty. The notebook still lay open on the coffee table. Eleanor went straight to the rehab center the next day. All right, at the worn desk with the coordinator, she talked it through. Not from a place of fairy tales or wishful thinking, but with clear eyes. Hazel needed safety. She needed stability. She needed a long-term plan overseen by people who understood wildlife laws and ethics. And she also seemed to need, at least for now, the specific connection she'd built in this small Colorado house. The compromise they reached was simple and strong. Hazel would remain under the sanctuary's umbrella, legally theirs. She would be considered a permanent, non-releasable bobcat in their care, but she would stay physically with Eleanor as a long-term approved foster, subject to regular check-ins, vet visits, and strict safety rules. If anything changed, Eleanor's health, Hazel's behavior, sanctuary capacity, they'd revisit the plan together. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood moment. No swelling music, just signatures on paper and a shared understanding. Love was staying, but it was staying with backup. When Eleanor came home that afternoon, she sat on the floor near the bookcase and began to read out loud. Nothing special, just a chapter from her current book, voice steady, legs crossed. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, with the slow gravity of a tide turning, Hazel crawled out from under the lowest shelf. Her fur was dusted with cobwebs. Her eyes were still wary, but she walked past the couch, past the table, and settled in the doorway of the kitchen, where she could see both Eleanor and the back window. She yawned once, a big, unself-conscious bobcat yawn, and rested her chin on her paws. Eleanor kept reading, tears blurring the words for a moment. This wasn't the kind of perfect, happy-ending moral stories like to offer. It was something better, a real moment between two beings who had hurt each other a little and decided deliberately to try again, with more support, more honesty, and more room for mistakes. As we move into the next part of their journey, Hazel and Eleanor will begin to build something new together. Quiet rituals, shared signals, a private language that only makes sense if you've ever loved a creature enough to learn their ways. If you've ever had a moment when you wondered, is this worth the risk? And chose to stay anyway, carefully, thoughtfully, you might recognize yourself in what comes next. You can tell a house has changed when even the quiet has a rhythm. A few months after Hazel arrived, the silence in Eleanor's Colorado home wasn't empty anymore. It had patterns. It had routines. It had its own language, spoken in paws and whiskers and soft, strange sounds that didn't quite belong to cats or people, but to something in between. It started every morning before the sun cleared the ridge. Eleanor would wake the way many of us do at a certain age, slowly, aware of her joints before her thoughts. For a while, those first seconds of consciousness had been the hardest part of the day. The moment when she remembered, all over again, who wasn't there. Now, most mornings, something else greeted her first. A small sound from the foot of the bed. Not a meow, not a growl, a quiet, warbling chirp, like a bird had learned to purr. Hazel's voice. Eleanor came to think of it as the good morning trill. It was never loud, never demanding. It was more like a check-in. I'm here, you're here. We made it through another night. Hazel didn't jump on the bed. Instead, the bobcat sat just close enough that Eleanor could see the outline of her ears when she cracked one eye open. Hazel would chirp once, twice, and watch for the slow, sleepy turn of Eleanor's head. Morning, Hazel, Eleanor would murmur, voice rough with sleep. That was enough. Hazel would blink, satisfied, and pad softly down the hall, claws plicking lightly on the wood. Two beings, acknowledging each other's survival at the start of the day. A tiny ritual, but one that stitched a little more love and loyalty into the fabric of the house each time it happened. The rest of their days filled up with rituals like that. In the late mornings, when the light angled just right through the living room window, a rectangular patch of sunshine landed on the floorboards. Hazel began to claim it with precision. Every day, almost to the minute, she'd stretch herself long in that spot, belly pressed to warm wood, chin resting on her paws. Eleanor took to sitting nearby with her coffee and her notebook. Not hovering, just sharing the sun in her own way. Sometimes she'd read aloud from a book, nothing dramatic, just a paragraph or two. Sometimes she'd list small things she was grateful for.
Hazel ate all her breakfast today. Arm almost healed. First time she closed her eyes while I talked.
It felt a little like prayer, though she didn't call it that. Just a small, soulful habit that kept her rooted in the quiet goodness of ordinary mornings. Hazel had her own ways of talking. Bobcats in the wild use a whole suite of signals. Ear flicks, tail twitches, low sounds that rarely travel far. Hazel carried those instincts into the house and slowly, almost shyly, began to offer them to Eleanor. There was the porch chirp. Whenever Eleanor stepped out to check the mail or water the small row of herbs on her porch, Hazel would trot to the closest window. As soon as she spotted the familiar figure outside, she'd let out one sharp, bright chirp. Not distressed, just noting, my person is out there. The same sound, again when she saw her come back. There was the stay with me tap. In the evenings, Eleanor sometimes slid too easily into old habits, scrolling through her phone, letting the TV hum through shows she'd seen before. On those nights, Hazel would hop up on the couch, not quite touching, and wait. If the distraction went on too long, a paw would reach out. Just one paw, just one soft tap on Eleanor's sleeve. Not a scratch, not a swat. A reminder. When it happened the first time, Eleanor looked down, surprised to see those tufted ears so close. Hazel's eyes were steady, not anxious. The message was clear enough. Be here, with me. After that, every tap pulled Eleanor back into the room. She began to welcome it. It was a kind of love, quiet, insistent, asking for presence instead of attention. They even developed what Eleanor secretly called the safe distance circle.
Whenever something new appeared,
A visitor at the door, a cardboard box on the floor, a different chair moved into the living room, Hazel would perform the same slow, looping walk. A wide arc around the unfamiliar object, never turning her back on it, never coming quite close enough to touch. 1 circle, 2, sometimes 3.
if Eleanor stayed relaxed, shoulders loose, voice calm,
Hazel's third lap would be tighter. She'd end the circle a little closer to Eleanor's feet, as if anchoring herself in the known while she made sense of the unknown. Years earlier, in the house where she'd been treated like a toy, nobody had listened when she gave those signals. Fear had been ignored until it turned into panic.
boundaries had been pushed until they shattered.
Here, every twitch of a whisker was answered with attention, not force. That was a different kind of kindness than the one you see in fairy tales and heartwarming stories that wrap up in 15 minutes.
This was kindness as a language.
Learned slowly, repeated daily, and understood without needing to be translated into words. Even simple grooming became a kind of conversation. Every few days, Eleanor would sit on the floor with a soft brush, set it on the rug in front of her, and wait. No coaxing, no reaching out, just an invitation. At first, Hazel watched from the doorway, body tense. Then curiosity, or memory, or both, would nudge her forward.
She'd approach in stages.
Doorway, halfway, arm's length, eyes flicking between Eleanor's face and the brush. When she finally settled within reach, Eleanor moved as if the air were thick, bringing the brush up in slow, visible arcs before it ever touched fur.
The first strokes were brief,
Light passes along Hazel's back, away from her head and belly. If Hazel's tail flicked sharply or her ears flattened, the brush paused. When her shoulders dropped, it continued. Over time, Hazel began to guide it herself. She'd lean into the bristles, angle her head so they caught the spot under her jaw, close her eyes when Eleanor found the exact right pressure. Her purr, deep and rough, would rumble through the room, as steady as a small engine.
To someone dropping by for a quick visit,
It might look like any other woman brushing any other animal. But to those two, it was a carefully negotiated dance, a promise honored over and over. I will not push you past what you can handle. I will listen when you say enough, even if you say it with your tail. The more they practiced this private language, the more the house shifted. What had once been an empty place where grief echoed became a home layered with meaning. The path from bedroom to kitchen wasn't just a hallway anymore. It was where Hazel waited in the mornings to see which direction Eleanor would turn first. The living room rug wasn't just fabric on the floor. It was where a bobcat rolled in the sun, while a human learned how to let her heart soften again. From the outside, this might not sound like much. It doesn't have the clean lines of the moral stories we grow up on. There's no simple beginning, middle, end. No moment where everything broken is suddenly fixed. But sitting in that house, watching Hazel's eyes track every move, feeling the way her small gestures added up day after day, Eleanor came to see it differently. This wasn't just an inspirational story about a rescue bobcat learning to trust. It was a story about two lives that had become a kind of shared prayer, not the whispered kind you say in church, but the lived kind you say with your hands. Making tea for two instead of one, leaving the lamp on a little longer so someone else can see the room clearly. Learning a new language of love that doesn't rely on words at all. As we move toward Hazel's sweetest moment, the one that would melt every heart that saw it, all of these rituals will matter. The good morning trills, the porch chirps, the stay with me taps, the quiet brushing sessions. They're the groundwork for the day she decides that a human lap might actually be the safest place in the world. If you've ever had your own private language with an animal, a certain look, a certain sound that only the two of you understood, you might feel a familiar tug in your chest hearing this. You might even find yourself remembering it now. Hold that memory close as we step into the next part of this story, where Hazel takes all the trust she's been quietly building and places it, quite literally, in Eleanor's arms. Sometimes, the biggest change in a life happens on a day that looks completely ordinary. No storm, No phone call. No crisis. Just a Tuesday in Colorado. The sky turning the color of cooled embers over the ridge. The scent of pine coming in through a cracked window. And a woman sitting on her couch with a book she isn't really reading. Hazel has been circling the room for a while, not in that anxious, restless way she used to, when every loop was a check for escape routes. This is slower, more thoughtful. Her paws are quiet on the floor, her tail low but loose, the muscles along her back relaxed. Eleanor can feel her moving, even when she pretends to stay focused on the page. Their private language has become so familiar that she can read Hazel without looking. The pause by the window, the half turn toward the kitchen, the small, rhythmic puffs of air that mean she's thinking hard about something. Tonight, Hazel wants something she doesn't quite know how to ask for. The lamp throws a soft circle of light across the coffee table. Eleanor's notebook lies open, pen resting along the spine. The TV is off. The kettle has already sung and fallen silent. It's one of those evenings where the house feels like it's holding its breath. Hazel stops in front of the couch. They've shared this space before. Hazel has sprawled alongside the cushions, leaning just close enough that Eleanor could feel the warmth coming off her fur. She's rested her paw on Eleanor's sleeve, tapping a reminder to stay present. She's even brushed against Eleanor's leg in passing, but she has never crossed this last boundary. For a long moment, she just stands there, looking up. Eleanor's hand lies open on her lap, palm relaxed. She doesn't move it toward Hazel, doesn't pat the cushion or whisper coaxing words. She's learned that with a bobcat, love can't be pulled. It has to be offered and then waited on. Hazel places one paw on Eleanor's knee. It's a test, as much for herself as for the human beneath it. The fabric of Eleanor's jeans is familiar. She's pressed her paw here before in passing. But this time she doesn't immediately retreat. Her claws stay sheathed. The touch is gentle, deliberate. Eleanor keeps her gaze soft, meeting Hazel's eyes without staring. For a moment, all the years between them fall away. The neglect Hazel survived, the losses Eleanor carries, the wrong turns and bad timing, and quiet nights that brought them both to this small living room. "Hey, sweetheart," she says softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Maybe Hazel doesn't understand the words, but she understands the tone, the steady, rooted kindness in it. She shifts her weight. The second paw follows the first, then a third, awkwardly finding a place on the soft fabric of a throw blanket. Hazel hesitates, looking down as if she's surprised by her own boldness. This is where a wild heart does something extraordinary. Instead of jumping back or launching herself over the arm of the couch, Hazel gathers herself and climbs. It's not graceful, not at first. Her back foot slips, hindquarters scrambling for a moment before she finds a solid spot. Eleanor fights the instinct to help, to steady, to guide. She lets Hazel work it out, lets her choose how she wants this to look, how close she's willing to come. Finally, Hazel settles. She folds her legs under herself, curling into the natural hollow of Eleanor's lap, like water pouring into the shape of a bowl. Her weight is there, not heavy, but real. A warm, living presence, where for so long there has been nothing but folded blankets and the memory of other bodies, long gone. The purr starts low. It's not the soft hum of a house cat, that gentle motor you can barely hear. This is deeper, rougher, a vibration that feels almost like a small engine turning over. Eleanor can feel it through her thighs, up into her chest, resonant and grounding. Hazel's eyes grow heavy at the edges. She blinks slowly, once, twice, then lets her gaze rest on Eleanor's face. If you've ever had an animal choose your lap for the first time, you know how big this small moment is. All the earlier heartwarming stories about Hazel, the storms weathered, the socks claimed, the morning trills, have been leading here to this quiet surrender, because that's what it is. Hazel could have kept their relationship at arm's length forever. She could have been content with her outdoor run, her safe distance circles, her rituals of watching from doorways. That alone would have been a happy ending for a bobcat who'd been through what she had. Instead, she's doing something rarer. She's letting love rest. Her tail curls around Eleanor's hip, not gripping, just loosely claiming. Mine. Her head lowers until her chin touches Eleanor's arm. For a long time, they simply breathe together. In and out. In and out. Hazel's purr swells and steadies, filling the room with a sound that feels almost like a blessing. Eleanor's eyes sting. She doesn't sob. She's done enough of that in other seasons of her life. This feels different. Not grief, but a kind of relief she hadn't believed she'd feel again. She thinks about all the moral stories we're told when we're young. Stories where love is loud and dramatic and fixes everything in a straight line. Heroes, miracles, happily ever after wrapped in bright paper. This isn't that. This is an inspirational story of a different kind. A wild animal who was thrown away, deciding one Tuesday evening that a human's lap is safe enough to hold all of her weight. A woman who thought her days of being needed were behind her, realizing that her presence, her patience, her steady, ordinary love have given a frightened creature enough courage to rest. What makes this moment soulful isn't just the trust. It's what it cost both of them to get here. Hazel had to risk being vulnerable again, after learning the hard way that humans can be careless with tenderness. Eleanor had to risk getting hurt again, physically, emotionally, after already losing more than her share. They both chose to show up, anyway. After a while, Hazel does something that takes this from heartwarming to almost sacred. She lifts one paw and places it, not on Eleanor's sleeve this time, not on the blanket, but right over Eleanor's chest, just there. Just enough pressure to feel the slow human heartbeat beneath her pads. In the wild, bobcat kittens knead against their mothers, sinking breath and warmth. Here, in a house lit by one lamp, a rescue bobcat cub presses her paw against the center of the person who has become her anchor, and keeps it there, like a promise. Eleanor lays her hand gently over Hazel's, fingers barely closing. No gripping, no holding her in place. Just a soft acknowledgement. I feel you. I'm here too. If anyone had walked in just then, they might have said it looked like a fairy tale. The wildcat, the gentle human, the cozy room, the quiet. But the truth underneath is deeper. This isn't fantasy. This is what love, loyalty, and patience can look like in real life, after the hard things have already happened. Eventually, Hazel's eyes close. Her purr doesn't stop. She falls asleep. Predators do not sleep in the arms of something they consider a threat. Prey animals do not lower their guard where danger lives. For a wild creature, sleep is the ultimate act of trust. In that moment, with Hazel's paw over her heart and her breathing slow against her ribs, Eleanor realizes something simple and profound. This gentle rescue bobcat cub didn't just want love. She had it to give. In the final part of this story, we'll step back and watch what their life looks like on the other side of this moment. How a quiet house in Colorado becomes a home shaped around two beating hearts, and how Hazel's story ripples outward into kindness for other wild lives. As you listen on, you might let yourself remember a time someone, animal or human, chose your presence when they didn't have to. Those are the moments that melt us, that soften what the world has hardened. Those are the moments that stay. After Hazel curled up in Eleanor's lap for the first time, the world didn't suddenly turn into one of those bright, easy fairy tales. The bills still came. The mountains still threw shadows across the valley at 4 in the afternoon. The kettle still whistled, the same as always. But inside that quiet house in Colorado, something had shifted, in a way that was hard to name and impossible to ignore. Life, after Hazel's sweetest moment, wasn't louder. It was deeper. Mornings carried a different weight now. When Eleanor woke and heard that soft good morning trill from the foot of the bed, it no longer felt like just a sound from a rescued bobcat. It felt like a promise that the day ahead would not have to be faced alone. She'd answer with a sleepy, "Morning, Hazel," and feel, in that exchange,
an almost invisible thread of love and loyalty pulling her out of bed and into her life.
The small routines they'd built took on a quiet glow. Putting fresh water in Hazel's bowl wasn't just a chore. It was a way to say, "You matter. You are seen." Cleaning the outdoor run became a kind of moving meditation, the brush and shovel keeping pace with Eleanor's thoughts as she watched Hazel track the sense of the wild world she would never fully return to, yet still carried inside her bones. On the days when Hazel chose Eleanor's lap again, more often now, though never taken for granted, Eleanor found herself breathing differently, slower, fuller. Each deep, rumbling purr seemed to shake loose feelings she'd tucked away after her partner died, and the house became too large for one person's grief. Hazel's weight was not heavy, but it was present, and that presence softened corners inside Eleanor she hadn't realized had grown so sharp. Outside their little circle, life, as always, carried other stories. At the rehab center, new animals arrived. Owls tangled in fishing line, foxes clipped by cars, another young bobcat who had been trapped near a housing development when she followed the smell of trash instead of rabbits. On some evenings, Eleanor would drive over to drop off donated blankets or pick up medication, and she'd listen as the staff talked about habitats shrinking, roads cutting through old hunting grounds, well-meaning people trying to turn wild things into house decorations. Those conversations gave Hazel's story a wider frame. It wasn't just a heartwarming story about one gentle rescue bobcat cub who wanted to be loved. It was also a reminder of what happens when human loneliness meets wildness without respect. People see spots and tufted ears and imagine a living plush toy, a moral story they can star in. The truth is far more complicated and more beautiful. Back at home, Eleanor did her best to hold that complexity with care. She never called Hazel her pet. To visitors, she said, "She's a non-releasable bobcat I'm fostering long-term for the sanctuary." The words felt a little formal, but they honored the line between kindness and possession. She knew, deep down, that love sometimes means loosening your grip instead of tightening it. Still, in the day-to-day of their shared life, labels fell away. There was just Hazel, curling into the worn curve of the couch. Hazel, tapping Eleanor's arm when her attention drifted too long to her phone. Hazel, pressing her nose to the glass whenever Eleanor stepped outside, making sure her person came back. Those were the moments that felt truly happy. Not the flashy kind of happiness that burns bright and fades, but the steady, soulful kind that roots itself quietly in ordinary days. Over time, Eleanor noticed something else. Hazel had not only healed in her care, she had helped heal Eleanor. The woman who once moved through her home like a guest now walked with a sense of belonging. She started cooking proper meals again instead of grazing on snacks. She called an old friend and invited her over for coffee, setting boundaries to keep Hazel safe but still letting connection back in. When the first snow of the new winter arrived, thick and silent, Eleanor stood at the window with Hazel pressed to the sill beside her. They watched flakes blur the pines, turning the world soft. Eleanor felt a quiet gratitude rise up, less a thought, more a warmth that spread through her chest. Not gratitude for some perfect resolution, but for the simple fact that two lives, both bumped and bruised by the years, had found a way to fit together. If you step back far enough, Hazel and Eleanor's time together becomes more than a single inspirational story. It becomes a gentle argument against the idea that we are meant to do our hardest seasons alone. It suggests that love doesn't always arrive the way we expect, wrapped in romance or framed by big speeches. Sometimes it arrives on 4 careful paws, with a history of neglect and a heart that's still willing to try. And sometimes, when we say yes to caring for another being, we discover that the kindness we offer has been quietly circling back to us all along. Maybe, as you've listened, a face has come to mind. A dog who slept by your chair through dark nights. A cat who always knew exactly when to climb into your lap. A person who showed up with groceries or a phone call, or a steady presence when you felt like you were coming apart. Those are the stories that rarely make the news. But they are the ones that keep the world stitched together. They remind us that even in a time when everything feels fast and loud, there is still room for slow, loyal, heartwarming stories about connection. Between humans, between animals, between your own past and the person you are becoming. Before we close Hazel's chapter for now, Eleanor sits once more on that familiar couch. Hazel is older, her coat thick and glossy, her movements easy. She still has her wild edges, startles at sudden noises, keeps her own counsel when strangers visit. But when the day winds down, she knows exactly where she wants to rest. She crosses the room, climbs without hesitation into Eleanor's lap, and lets her full weight sink into the person who chose her when no one else would. The purr starts up, that deep, grounding song, and the room fills again with the hum of a bond that shouldn't have been possible, but is. And in that quiet, if you listen closely, there's an invitation for you. Not to go out and bring a wild animal into your home. Hazel's path is an exception, held by permits and professionals, but to look gently at your own life and ask, where is there a heart, human or animal, that I can show up for with more kindness? What part of me is still waiting to be held? The way Hazel finally allowed herself to be held. Take a moment after this video ends to think about the love and loyalty that have carried you this far. The small, soulful connections that shaped you. If Hazel's journey and Eleanor's quiet courage touched something inside you, it would mean a lot if you tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story we share from the wild edges where healing can happen. And if you feel moved to go one step further, you're warmly invited to use the Super Thanks button or the donate link below. Your support helps real-world rescuers care for wild animals like bobcats, giving them safe places to heal and giving humans a chance to meet them with the tenderness they deserve. Thank you for being here, for listening with your heart, and for helping keep kindness alive in a world that needs it.